And now, Mitchell, I'm going to ask you something that Colin Powell would have asked you when you were his policy planning chief. The president has just asked for a refresh on a new approach to Iran. That was your job. Give us your thoughts on what that would look like.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Lincoln. I want to thank my distinguished panelists and the organizers for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be back with you all again. I think, listening very carefully to my colleagues on this panel and the previous panels, I think that we can all agree on three big things, not just among us here, everybody in the audience, and hopefully everybody who's watching this around the world. The first thing is that the current regime in Iran presents a clear and present danger. It is an ongoing threat, not only domestically, but also to the United States and to friends and allies around the world. The latest worldwide threat assessment by the U.S. intelligence community in February 2023 highlights the threats that Iran poses. They continue to be the leading state sponsor of terrorism for many, many years now in a row. The head of MI5 recently said that in the last 18 months, the Iranian regime has tried to either abduct or assassinate 15 UK citizens or UK people, individuals living in the UK. 15 over the last year and a half. This is a regime that clearly has a dangerous posture towards the rest of the world. I think we all agree on that. The second thing is that the regime is illegitimate. It clearly doesn't have the support of its people. We see that every day by the brave protests led by the women in Iran and the people that have made incredible sacrifices opposing this regime. It is illegitimate fundamentally. And the third big thing that I think we can all agree upon is that, as Bob Torricelli said earlier, it's unwilling and unable to change. Hope springs eternal in the hearts of some people that it's going to moderate itself, that it's going to evolve, that over time it'll be more reasonable. There's no indication that that's true. In fact, there's an argument that the reverse is happening. They're becoming more repressive as they become more fragile with their domestic support eroding. So I think those are fundamental truths that we can all agree upon. So then that leads to what's the key policy question? And I think the key policy question is this: what can we do to accelerate the end of this regime? What can we do to accelerate the end of this regime? And I think that we can do quite a few things, actually, some of which we're doing, perhaps not as effectively as we could be, some things that are perhaps a little bit new. So let me just read a list of things that we could be doing. Lincoln and I were talking earlier about exposing the human rights violations and the appalling human rights record of this regime. Governments can do this. Parliamentarians can do this. The UN Human Rights Commission should do this. Not just Amnesty International. Everybody should know the true nature of this repressive regime. So again, this gets back to Bob Joseph's comment about values. Values that we share are the dignity of the individual. This regime doesn't care for that. We need to expose that. The second thing we can do is expose the corruption of the mullahs, of the IRGC, of the Basij. They've all taken millions of dollars from the Iranian people, and they've deposited in overseas bank accounts. We have a pretty good idea of who's done that and where it's deposited. Let's expose them and feed that information back to the Iranian people. Third thing is increasing the sanctions. Clearly, sanctions have not had the effect of toppling the regime, but they do inflict some pain. And as Steve McCabe said earlier, if they're going to expire, then they need to be renewed and strengthened. Another thing we need to do is to increase the amount of news that gets into Iran. Again, Senator Torricelli saying we all have a role to play in that, but there are also governments that can program more radio programs, streaming services into Iran, so the people of Iran understand what's happening around the world, and that people like us and elsewhere around the world stand with them as they are fighting this courageous fight. We also need to do something to restore what General was just saying about the U.S. relationship in the region, both diplomatically and militarily. We need to restore our credibility with these countries. I would say General, that it wasn't just that one thing that you mentioned in terms of the pivot. I think that there's been a series of American actions and declarations that have had people question America's credibility. And what they do is that they do what humans would normally do. They start hedging their bets. Right. And so they start reaching out to Iran, to China, to Russia, because they can't count on the United States anymore. That can be corrected. It needs to be corrected as soon as possible. And I'm going to offer a surprising policy suggestion. It, again, came from a conversation I had with Link earlier today, and it's to try to revive and update the Carter Doctrine. The Carter Doctrine from January 1980. President Carter said that the Persian Gulf was a vital American interest, and we would defend those interests by all means necessary, including the use of military options. Okay? That hasn't been restated by any American president that I know of in many, many years. And to say that, updated for the new circumstances, by the Biden administration or whatever administration comes next, I think would have a galvanizing effect among our allies, but certainly among the mullahs in Tehran. And again, what can we do to accelerate the end of this regime? I have to say, at the very top, is to support the opposition, especially the NCRI and the MEK. There's more than we can all do to support them. There's much more that our governments can do. That, along with all these other measures, I think, will be the best possible holistic approach to ending this reign of tyranny in Tehran and welcoming a new democracy for the Iranian people. Thank you.
Thank you, Mitchell. Ambassador Reiss, as General Wall just made clear, you can use hard power. There's risk involved, and there's hesitation. It's natural. So let me ask you about a diplomatic move that would have risk involved and involve hesitation. Is there any reason why the U.S. and other governments can't go and interview the residents of Ashraf 3 and ask them what happened to them at the hands of Raisi and the Iranians?
Well, there's not only no reason why they can't do it, I don't see that there's actually much of a risk. In fact, I could see it as enhancing a much more robust American policy towards Iran as part of a whole-of-government approach. You'd have a public relations approach to it. You'd have a military approach. You'd have a diplomatic approach. You'd have the human rights aspect of it. You'd have the anti-corruption. You'd have the sanctions. All of these need to be wedded together. But getting the truth out about what's happened at Ashraf and the story that so many people can tell from firsthand experience of the repression of this regime, how can that do anything except help an American policy if the goal is to accelerate the end of this regime?
Well,